They thought the cameras were there to protect them. The lights inside City Hall's media room burned white and sharp, washing every face in that cold official glow that made people look cleaner than they were. Rows of folding chairs were packed with reporters, local staffers, and community observers, their phones half-raised, their notebooks open, their voices blending into that restless pre-conference murmur that always filled the air before someone important stepped to a podium. At the front of the room, beneath a blue city seal and two American flags standing perfectly still, the microphone waited like a loaded question. This was supposed to be a controlled morning, the kind built for rehearsed statements and polished denials, the kind where uniforms stood near the walls with folded hands and careful expressions, pretending order was the same thing as truth. And then Vanessa Brooks walked in. She did not arrive like a woman trying to make a scene. She wore a navy blazer, low heels, and the kind of calm expression that never begged to be noticed, yet somehow pulled attention anyway. She moved with quiet purpose, a leather folder tucked close beneath one arm, her eyes sweeping the room once. Not nervously, not curiously, but like someone measuring the space before the first move of a game only she fully understood. A few reporters glanced up. One of them whispered to another that she looked familiar. A city aide near the back stiffened the second he saw her, then quickly looked away. Vanessa noticed all of it and gave nothing back. She took a place near the front row, close enough to hear every word the department was about to say, close enough to see whether the people behind the podium believed their own script. Around her, the room kept breathing in that shallow, anxious way public institutions always did when scandal hovered just outside the frame. A cameraman adjusted his tripod. Someone near the side door muttered that the chief was running 3 minutes late. Another reporter tapped her pen against her badge and stared toward the entrance, waiting for the show to begin. Vanessa remained still. Her shoulders were square. Her chin was level. Even in a crowded room, even with every eye chasing the next headline, there was something about her silence that felt deliberate, almost dangerous. Then the first uniform moved. Officer Ryan Cole had been standing near the rear wall, broad-shouldered, jaw set, watching the room with the practiced authority of a man used to being obeyed before he finished speaking. But now his focus narrowed on Vanessa with a sudden hardness that changed the air around him. He said something low to the officer beside him, Daniel Reeves, and both men started forward. At first, no one reacted. Why would they? It was a press conference. Officers moved around. Security checked people. It was normal, until it wasn't. Ryan stopped beside Vanessa's chair and looked down at her as though the entire room belonged to him. "Ma'am, stand up," he said, loud enough for the nearest cameras to catch. The hum of conversation thinned. Vanessa lifted her eyes to his face, calm as ever. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked. Her voice was steady, almost gentle, and for a second that only seemed to irritate him more. "Stand up. Now." A few heads turned, then a few more. The shift rippled outward in seconds, curiosity moving faster than explanation. Vanessa rose slowly, holding her folder against her side. "You're making a mistake," she said, and those 4 words should have cooled the moment, should have invited caution, should have made someone pause and ask a question before turning procedure into spectacle. But Ryan Cole was not interested in caution. He was interested in control. "We'll decide that," he replied, reaching for her wrist as the first camera swung fully in their direction. The room went still in that eerie, suspended way crowds do when they sense humiliation about to unfold and do not yet know whose side they are on. Vanessa did not pull away. She did not raise her voice. She only looked past him, toward the empty podium at the front of the room, and said, with a quietness that somehow landed harder than a shout, "Chief, don't do this." The click of cameras came first. Not loud at first, not dramatic, just a scattered series of sharp little sounds bouncing off the walls of the media room. As reporters turned in their seats and lenses shifted toward Vanessa Brooks like sunflowers chasing heat. Then came the whispers, thin and fast, and multiplying by the second. Who is she? What did she do? Is this part of the announcement? In a room built for statements, suspicion moved quicker than truth ever could. Officer Ryan Cole kept his hand firm around Vanessa's wrist, not rough, not frantic, just deliberate in the way men could be when they believed a badge made every assumption look official. Officer Daniel Reeves stepped to her other side, uncertain enough that it showed in the brief flicker of his eyes, but still willing to follow the current Ryan had created. Vanessa stood between them with her folder pressed against her side and her expression unchanged, as if this had become dangerous long before anyone else in the room realized it. The reporters leaned forward. A woman in the second row lowered her pen and raised her phone. A freelance photographer near the aisle whispered to Nina Ellis from Channel 8, asking if she knew the woman being detained. Nina did not answer right away. She was staring too hard at Vanessa's face, at that impossible composure, at the strange mismatch between the scene in front of her and the woman in the center of it. People who crashed public events usually looked rattled, defensive, unprepared. Vanessa looked like she had walked into the room with a reason. Ryan sensed the attention and straightened, his voice lifting just enough to claim the space. "This area is restricted," he announced, no longer speaking just to Vanessa but to the room itself. "She has been instructed to step back and failed to comply." It was the kind of statement meant to close a story before it started, neat and confident, and just vague enough to survive the first round of questions. But the room had already changed. The crowd was no longer waiting for the chief's talking points. It was watching a woman in a navy blazer being turned into a problem in real time. Vanessa drew one careful breath. "That is not what happened," she said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her calm cut through the room more effectively than shouting. "Would have." Ryan gave a tight smile that never reached his eyes. "You can explain that outside." "No," Vanessa said, and now a few more heads turned from curiosity to concern, because there was something in that one word that carried weight. Not panic, not defiance for its own sake. "Wait, I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Daniel glanced at Ryan then, just for a second, and that second said everything. He was starting to feel it too, that small fracture in the story, the first sign that this woman was not who Ryan had decided she was. But momentum had already taken over. Behind them, the side doors opened and 3 more city staffers stepped in, then stopped cold when they saw the cameras trained on the scene. One of them, a thin man in a gray suit with a city access badge, went pale so quickly it looked like the blood had drained out of him all at once. His eyes dropped to the folder tucked beneath Vanessa's arm, and then he looked away as though even recognizing it in public could cost him. Nina Ellis caught that. So did Vanessa. Across the room, one of the podium microphones gave a faint burst of feedback as the sound crew adjusted levels for a conference that had stopped being routine several minutes ago. A producer near the back whispered into her headset that they were already live on the local stream. That detail moved through the room with silent force. Live. This was not just a mistake unfolding in public. It was being preserved, archived, shared, rewatched. Ryan either did not know or did not care. "Take the folder," he said to Daniel, nodding toward Vanessa's side. Daniel hesitated. Vanessa looked directly at him for the first time. "Officer Reeves," she said, reading his nameplate as easily as if she had known it before walking in. "You need to think very carefully about what happens next." His hand stopped halfway. That was when the room truly shifted, not because of her words alone, but because of how she said them. There was no pleading in her voice, no bluff, just certainty, cold and controlled, like someone watching a fuse burn toward a door only she knew was locked from the other side. And somewhere beyond the side entrance, hidden, just long enough to make the moment worse, footsteps began moving toward the podium. The footsteps did not rush. That was what made them heavier. They came with the measured rhythm of people used to entering rooms where everyone else was expected to stop talking the moment they arrived. Heads turned toward the side entrance. A pair of department aides stepped in first, followed by Chief Harold Mercer in a dark suit and polished black shoes, his posture straight, his face arranged in the calm, practiced expression of a man who had spent years standing behind microphones and speaking in complete sentences while other people absorbed the consequences. For half a second, the room seemed to remember what it had originally gathered there for. Pens lifted, cameras adjusted, reporters shifted forward, ready to catch the official line. Then Mercer's eyes landed on Vanessa Brooks, standing between officers Ryan Cole and Daniel Reeves, and whatever sentence had been waiting behind his teeth died before it reached the air. It was not dramatic in the loud, theatrical way television liked to imagine shock. It was quieter than that, smaller, more human. His stride shortened by less than an inch, but everyone saw it. His expression did not collapse, but it tightened around the eyes and mouth in a way that did not belong in front of cameras. One of the aides behind him nearly walked into his shoulder before catching himself. The room felt it instantly. Something was wrong. Ryan Cole, still fueled by the authority of his own momentum, misread the silence as approval. He straightened and addressed the chief across the room, as if presenting a solved problem. "Sir, we have an unauthorized individual interfering with a restricted departmental event." His voice carried cleanly. Too cleanly. In the front row, Nina Ellis stopped writing and looked from Ryan to the chief and back again, her reporter's instinct now fully awake. Mercer did not answer right away. He was still looking at Vanessa, and Vanessa was looking back at him with the kind of stillness that made movement around her seem foolish. She did not plead. She did not explain. She just stood there under the heat of the cameras. One wrist held, the leather folder tucked against her side. As if she were waiting for a test, everyone else did not know they had already failed. "Chief," Ryan said again, firmer this time, because men like him often mistook hesitation for weakness and silence for a space they were entitled to fill. She refused repeated instructions. "We were about to remove her." Mercer's jaw shifted once. It was a tiny movement, but Daniel Reeves saw it and lowered his hand from Vanessa's folder without being told. He had gone pale in the last 30 seconds, and now he looked like a man hearing thunder before the first drop of rain. The city aide in the gray suit near the wall had not moved at all. His eyes remained fixed on the folder beneath Vanessa's arm, and his expression had settled into that unmistakable look of someone watching a secret become public too soon. Mercer finally stepped forward, though not with the easy confidence he had entered with. The lights above the podium caught the silver at his temples and flattened the color in his face. "Officer Cole," he said, and even that sounded different than it should have, quieter, thinner, less like command and more like calculation. Ryan glanced at the reporters, then back at the chief, unaware that every second of confidence he projected was now turning against him. "Yes, sir." Mercer's eyes flicked once more to Vanessa, then to the cameras, then to the city seal behind the podium, as if the room itself had become a trap built from symbols he no longer trusted. "On what grounds?" he asked. It should have been a simple question. It should have brought clarity. Instead, it deepened the unease already spreading through the room. Ryan frowned slightly, surprised to be asked. Security concern, possible disruption, failure to comply with instruction. He said it quickly, like a list memorized from repetition rather than thought. The answer hung there, dry and procedural, while the room waited for Mercer to confirm it, bless it, move on. But Mercer did not. Vanessa's voice entered the silence like a blade sliding across glass. "That is not why I am being detained." More cameras turned. Nina Ellis rose halfway from her chair, without realizing she had done it. Mercer closed his eyes for the briefest instant, and when he opened them again, there was something in his face that had not been there before. Not anger, not confusion, recognition. The dangerous kind. The kind that arrived too late to stop the damage, but early enough to understand exactly how bad it was about to become. Ryan finally noticed it then. The certainty in his posture faltered. He looked from the chief to Vanessa, and for the first time since crossing the room, the possibility touched him that he had not interrupted a threat. He had interrupted a plan. And in a room full of cameras, with the entire city waiting to hear one version of the truth, Chief Harold Mercer realized the story had already changed. The room did not breathe the same way after that. It was still packed with reporters and staff and uniformed officers standing along the walls, still bright with camera lights and polished microphones and the staged authority of City Hall. But something fundamental had shifted. The illusion of control had cracked. You could feel it in the silence between movements, in the way people looked at one another now instead of toward the podium, in the way every small sound suddenly seemed too sharp. A chair leg scraped the floor near the back. A camera operator cleared his throat. Somewhere by the left wall, a staffer's phone vibrated against a metal folding chair and made 3 people flinch. Chief Harold Mercer stood a few steps from the podium, caught between the story he had planned to tell and the one now unfolding in front of him. Vanessa Brooks watched him with that same impossible composure, her gaze steady, her shoulders squared, her presence somehow larger now that the room understood she was not there by accident. Officer Ryan Cole was still holding on to procedure because procedure was all he had left. Men like him survived uncertainty by tightening their grip on whatever script had worked before. "Sir," he said, his voice a shade lower this time, but still trying to sound certain, "we can clear this and proceed. Just give the order." It was the wrong sentence. Too blunt, too eager, too revealing. Nina Ellis heard it and wrote it down immediately, her pen moving faster now, her instincts telling her this was no longer a routine media event, but the kind of public fracture reporters spent years waiting to catch on camera. Mercer did not answer Ryan. His eyes drifted once more to the leather folder tucked against Vanessa's side. The folder was simple, dark, unmarked from a distance, but close enough for people paying attention. There was something official about its weight, about the way Vanessa carried it. Not like a personal item, not like notes for a complaint, but like documentation meant to outlive excuses. The gray-suited city, near the wall, swallowed hard and took a step back, as though distance could protect him from recognition. Vanessa noticed that too. She seemed to notice everything. "Chief," she said softly, and the room leaned into that one word because it held none of the fear everyone had expected from her and all of the pressure. "You know why I am here." No one moved. Not Ryan. Not Daniel. Not the staffers clustered by the side entrance. Even the cameras seemed to steady themselves. Mercer's face tightened. He was a man used to choosing language carefully, but careful language only worked when the ground beneath it was solid. This ground was not solid anymore. "Ms. Brooks," he said at last, and the name struck the room like a match. Reporters looked up from notebooks. A producer near the back mouthed the name to herself as if searching memory. Nina Ellis repeated it under her breath, and something clicked behind her eyes. She knew she had seen it before, attached to a city memo, a closed-door hearing, maybe a records request denied 3 weeks earlier with suspicious speed. Ryan Cole turned his head toward Mercer, so sharply it was almost audible. He had not expected a name. He had expected confirmation. "You know her?" he asked before he could stop himself. Mercer did not look at him. That told the room more than an answer would have. Vanessa shifted the folder in her hand, and as she did, a paper inside slid just far enough for the corner to show. It was only a glimpse. A heavy cream sheet. A stamped seal. The edge of official lettering. But in a room full of journalists, glimpses were enough. Nina rose to her feet completely now. "Chief Mercer," she said, her voice clear and professional. "Is this woman affiliated with the review board?" A second reporter stood up before Mercer could respond. "Is she with the city inspector's office?" Another voice came from the right side of the room. "Was this detention authorized?" Suddenly, the questions were no longer waiting for the department's prepared remarks. They were coming fast and from all directions, piling on top of one another, turning the room from a stage into a cross-examination. Ryan's confidence thinned visibly. He looked to Daniel Reeves for reinforcement, but Daniel had already taken half a step away from Vanessa, his face gone pale enough to tell the truth his mouth had not yet formed. Vanessa did not speak over the reporters. She did not need to. She only stood there while the questions multiplied, while the cameras stayed fixed, while the carefully managed morning began to unravel under the weight of one name and one look from a chief who had frozen because he recognized not a trespasser, not a protester, but the one person in that room who had arrived with the power to see through every polished lie. The questions kept coming, each one sharper than the last, and for the first time that morning Chief Harold Mercer looked less like the man in charge and more like a man calculating how much damage could still be contained. Reporters were no longer waiting for the official statement. They were standing now, half of them with phones raised, the other half firing questions across the room with the practiced speed of people who knew when a polished event had turned into real news. Nina Ellis took one step into the aisle, her press badge swaying against her blazer. "Chief Mercer, did your department detain a city official in the middle of a live press conference?" she asked. Another reporter followed immediately. Was this woman expected to be here? A third voice cut in from near the back. "What exactly is in that folder?" The room surged, not physically, but emotionally, the pressure rising 1 degree at a time. Vanessa Brooks remained still in the center of it all, and that stillness did more than any protest ever could. She did not look overwhelmed. She did not look rescued either. She looked patient, like someone who had arrived knowing the truth would reveal itself if given enough rope. Officer Ryan Cole heard the shift in the room and tried to get ahead of it. "Everybody needs to step back," he said. raising his voice toward the reporters as if volume alone could rebuild the authority that had begun to slip from his hands. "This is an active security situation." But even as he said it, it sounded thinner than before, less like fact and more like cover. Daniel Reeves no longer stood shoulder to shoulder with him. He had eased back by another foot, not enough to make a show of it, but enough that anyone watching closely could see he no longer wanted his judgment tied to Ryan's. Vanessa turned her head slightly toward Mercer. "You can stop this now," she said. It was a quiet sentence, almost gentle, but it landed with the weight of final warning. Mercer's eyes closed for the briefest second, and when they opened again, something had changed. Not relief, not resolve, acceptance. The kind that comes when a person realizes the moment they feared has already arrived, and all that remains is choosing whether to lie badly or tell the truth too late. He stepped forward, closer to the podium, but not behind it, as if even he understood the podium no longer belonged to him. "Officer Cole," he said carefully, each word measured to the inch, "release Ms. Brooks." The room froze, then erupted in a dozen fresh questions at once. Ryan stared at him, clearly convinced he had heard wrong. "Sir." Mercer did not raise his voice, but the second command came firmer. "Release her. Immediately." Ryan's face drained in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with public humiliation beginning to dawn in real time. He looked around as though someone else might step in and rescue the logic of the last 5 minutes. But there was no rescue waiting for him. Only cameras. Only witnesses. Only a room full of people realizing that the woman he had tried to remove was someone the chief himself had just ordered treated. With care, Daniel moved first. He reached toward Vanessa's wrist with an expression so tight and uneasy it was obvious he understood now that whatever happened next would live on every screen in the city by nightfall. Vanessa lowered her eyes briefly, not in submission, but to watch the process complete. When her hand was free again, she did not rub her wrist or dramatize the moment. She simply adjusted the sleeve of her blazer with calm precision and took the leather folder back fully into her own grasp. That small motion said more than anger would have. It said she had never lost control of herself, only revealed the lack of it in everyone else. Nina Ellis lifted her chin. "Chief Mercer," she said, her voice clear enough to cut across the room. "Who is Vanessa Brooks?" The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Mercer looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked back. Around them, every camera held steady. Every reporter waited. Every staffer near the wall seemed to stop blinking. Then Mercer answered, and the words hit the room with the force of a door unlocking in a house full of secrets. "Ms. Brooks is senior counsel to the Civilian Accountability Review Office." For a heartbeat, no one moved because the sentence took time to settle. Then everything changed. Pens flew. Voices rose. The city aide in the gray suit sank into the nearest chair as though his knees had given up their argument with gravity. Ryan Cole did not speak. He just stared at Vanessa with the stunned emptiness of a man discovering he had not detained a disruption. He had detained oversight itself. For one suspended second, the room seemed unable to decide whether to explode or go completely silent. Then it did both. Reporters started speaking over one another so fast that the words blurred into a wall of urgency. But beneath that noise there was a deeper stillness, the kind that settles over a place the moment everyone realizes they have just witnessed a mistake too big to file away. Vanessa Brooks stood at the center of it with her folder held close, her posture unchanged, her face composed in a way that made the panic around her look even smaller. Chief Harold Mercer had spoken the truth. But truth was never clean once it arrived late. It dragged everything behind it. Nina Ellis was already moving, not toward the podium, but toward Vanessa, because real reporters knew the official statement had just lost its value. "Ms. Brooks," she called out, voice sharp enough to rise above the room. "Were you here in an oversight capacity today?" Vanessa did not answer right away. She let the question sit there, and in that pause you could feel the room leaning toward her in a way it had not leaned toward anyone else all morning. The city staffers along the wall looked stricken now, no longer like employees supporting a press event, but like people realizing they had wandered into the wrong chapter of a story that had been in motion long before they walked in. Officer Ryan Cole remained where he was, though his certainty had drained out of him so completely that he now seemed almost separate from his own uniform. His shoulders were still squared, but there was no command in them anymore. Only confusion, pride, and the first cold edge of consequences. Daniel Reeves looked down at the floor, then up at Vanessa, then quickly away, as if eye contact itself had become a form of confession. Chief Mercer raised a hand for calm, but the gesture had lost its authority. The room was past gestures now. "This press conference is temporarily delayed," he said, trying to reclaim a tone that had slipped out of his reach. The sentence landed flat. No one cared about the schedule anymore. A reporter near the back called out, "Delayed because your department detained its own oversight counsel on camera?" Another voice followed from the left side. "Chief, did your officers know who she was?" Mercer's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked every one of his years, not old exactly, but tired in the way institutions look tired when they are forced to face themselves in public. Vanessa finally lifted her chin and spoke, and the room quieted with startling speed. "I was invited to observe this briefing and review any statements made regarding pending misconduct findings," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and precise, with none of the shakiness people often expected after. "Public humiliation. I identified myself upon arrival to the appropriate staff contact." That sentence dropped like a stone into water. Somewhere near the wall, the gray-suited aide who had gone pale earlier shut his eyes and pressed 2 fingers to his forehead. Nina Ellis heard that phrase and seized it immediately. "Appropriate staff contact?" she asked. "Are you saying someone in this building knew you were here before this happened?" Vanessa's gaze shifted, just briefly, toward the side of the room where the aide stood. She did not point. She did not accuse. She did not need to. The room followed her eyes on its own. In that instant, the mistake widened. It was no longer about one officer making a reckless call in public. It was becoming a question of whether the department had ignored, mishandled, or buried oversight from the moment she walked in. Ryan seemed to understand that before anyone said it aloud. "Sir," he said to Mercer, quieter now, almost hoarse, "I was told she was not cleared." He should have stayed silent. The moment the words left his mouth, every reporter in the room pounced on them. Told by who? Who gave that order? Was there an instruction to remove her? Cameras shifted again, chasing not the woman once treated like an intruder, but the chain of fear now revealing itself one sentence at a time. Vanessa did not react to Ryan's outburst except to hold her folder a little more firmly. The seal visible inside caught the light for an instant, and Nina recognized it fully now. City Review Authority. Internal findings. Not rumor. Not opinion. Documentation. Mercer looked at Ryan with a mixture of disbelief and anger, but neither emotion was his greatest problem anymore. His greatest problem was that the cameras were still rolling, the room was full of witnesses, and Vanessa Brooks had not once raised her voice. She had not needed to. The system had humiliated itself for her. And as the questions tightened around the podium and the staff along the wall began to unravel under the weight of what they knew, Vanessa took one slow step forward, no longer standing like a woman defending her place in the room, but like the one person in it who had actually come prepared for the truth. Vanessa Brooks did not hurry to explain herself. That was the detail people remembered later, not just that she had been right, but that she had not rushed to prove it to people who had already shown how quickly they could judge her. She stepped forward into the widening silence with her leather folder held against her side, and the entire room seemed to shift around that one motion. Camera lights stayed fixed on her face. Reporters stopped interrupting one another long enough to hear the next sentence. Even Chief Harold Mercer, who had spent the last several minutes trying to keep the morning from collapsing in public, went still again as if he already knew what she was about to say would not merely correct the record. It would reorder the room. "I am not here as an observer alone," Vanessa said. Her voice was steady, low, and precise, the kind of voice that did not ask for attention because it had already earned it. "I was assigned to monitor today's briefing, review the department's prepared public statement, and verify compliance with the city's active misconduct disclosure protocol." A murmur passed through the room like a gust moving across dry leaves. Some of the reporters understood immediately. The rest understood when Nina Ellis said it aloud, half to herself and half to the cameras. She was sent to oversee the chief. That sentence landed hard. Harder than the revelation of her title had. Harder than Mercer's order to release her. Because titles could still be misunderstood. Procedures could still be buried under jargon. But that sentence was plain. It told everyone exactly what the balance of power had been before Officer Ryan Cole walked across the room and turned arrogance into evidence. Vanessa opened the folder at last. Not dramatically, not with any flourish meant to impress. She simply lifted the cover and removed one cream-colored document stamped with the seal of the Civilian Accountability Review Office, then a second sheet bearing the office of the city manager, then a third containing the briefing agenda for that very morning. She held them at her side, visible enough for the cameras, visible enough for the reporters in the front rows to lean forward and confirm the headers for themselves. My office was provided advance notice of this press event 72 hours ago, she continued. I was directed to attend in person due to discrepancies between the department's draft statement and the findings submitted last week. Chief Mercer lowered his eyes for a moment, and that was all the confirmation the room needed to know she was telling the truth. Ryan Cole looked as though the floor had shifted under him. He glanced from the documents to Mercer, then to Daniel Reeves, then back to Vanessa, trying and failing to locate the version of reality in which this could still be a misunderstanding simple enough to survive. But misunderstandings did not come with city seals and briefing assignments. Misunderstandings did not arrive invited. Nina Ellis moved closer, voice sharpened now by certainty. Ms. Brooks, are you saying this department prepared to address misconduct findings this morning while detaining the official assigned to verify those findings? Vanessa looked toward her. I am saying that before this briefing began, I identified myself through the proper channel, presented my credentials, and took the seat indicated to me by staff. She paused just long enough for the weight of that to settle. What happened after that is now part of the record. Imagine standing there while an entire room realizes the person they watched being treated like an interruption was, in fact, the one person sent to make sure the truth was not edited before it reached the public. Imagine what it does to a man who thought he was controlling the scene when he understands the scene was there to expose him. Ryan's mouth opened once, then closed. Whatever defense had been building inside him was dying in real time because every path led somewhere worse. Mercer looked older now, not because minutes had passed, but because denial had. He knew there was no clean way out of this. The reporters knew it too. Questions started rising again, faster and more focused than before. Who instructed security that she was not cleared? Was the oversight office intentionally obstructed? Did the department alter its public statement? Vanessa did not answer all of them. She did not need to. The documents in her hand were answering enough. Her title had made the room pay attention. Her assignment made them understand. She had not come to witness the briefing from the sidelines. She had come with authority greater than a podium, greater than a uniform in a crowded room, greater even than a chief's carefully rehearsed remarks. And as the cameras caught Chief Mercer's face hardening with the knowledge that the worst part of the morning was no longer the mistake itself, but what the mistake revealed, everyone in that media room finally understood why he had frozen the moment he saw her. The room did not belong to Chief Mercer anymore. It did not belong to Officer Ryan Cole, or the department seal behind the podium, or the carefully arranged line of microphones waiting for a statement that now felt cheap and outdated before it was ever spoken. It belonged to the record. You could feel that change in every corner of the media room. The reporters were no longer chasing a scandal in theory. They were documenting one in progress. Camera operators moved with sharper purpose. Producers whispered into headsets with that breathless urgency that comes when a local story turns into something bigger than the noon segment. Along the sidewall, city staffers stood rigid and silent, their faces drained of the professional calm they had brought into the room. No one wanted to be the next person caught on camera saying the wrong thing. Vanessa Brooks remained where she was, the documents still in her hand, not raised like a threat, not waved like a victory, just held with the kind of quiet certainty that made them more powerful than any shouted accusation. Chief Mercer looked at Officer Ryan Cole for a long moment, and in that look there was no protection left. Whatever instinct he may have had to shield his department had been crushed by timing, by witnesses, by the simple fact that Vanessa had arrived with the authority of process and Ryan had answered with public humiliation. Officer Cole, Mercer said at last, his voice low but clear enough for every microphone. In the room, step away from Ms. Brooks and surrender your event access badge. It was not a suspension yet, not formally, not in the full administrative sense, but everyone in that room understood exactly what it meant. Public removal, Immediate loss of trust. The first visible crack in a chain of authority that had counted on never being challenged in front of cameras. Ryan stared at him as if the sentence had reached him in the wrong language. Sir, with respect, I acted on what I was told. The words came out fast, brittle, defensive. He was not looking at Vanessa anymore. He was looking at Mercer, at the aide by the wall, at anyone who might still help him spread the blame wide enough to survive it. But Mercer had no room left for shared confusion. That is now under review, he said. Step back. Daniel Reeves obeyed first, taking another full step away from Vanessa, his hands open at his sides, his expression tight with the knowledge that survival in institutions often belongs to the one who recognizes reality fastest. Ryan did not move right away, and in that hesitation the room saw the final reversal. A man who had crossed the floor like he owned the moment now looked stranded inside it. Nina Ellis did not miss a second. Chief Mercer, is Officer Cole being removed from duty in response to obstructing oversight? She called out. Another reporter followed instantly. Will the department preserve all internal communications from this morning? A third voice rose from near the back. Was there an attempt to keep Ms. Brooks from reviewing the public statement before release? Every question pulled the morning further away from the script the department had prepared. Vanessa let them ask. She did not interrupt. She did not pile on. That restraint made everything sharper. It made her look not only right, but disciplined, and discipline in moments like these carried its own kind of force. Mercer nodded once toward departmental security at the back. Two supervisors moved forward, not hurried, not dramatic, but firm. Ryan's event badge was collected in full view of the cameras. No one touched him roughly. No one needed to. The humiliation was already complete. Because the same room that had watched him try to remove Vanessa was now watching him be quietly removed from the authority he had misused. Imagine standing there and realizing the loudest thing in the room is not anger, but consequence. Imagine the sound of your own certainty disappearing while the woman you tried to dismiss adjusts her sleeve, gathers her documents, and remains calmer than everyone around her. Vanessa took one slow breath and placed the papers back into her folder. Then she looked toward the podium, where the official statement still waited beside the microphones like a lie that had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Chief Mercer, she said, her voice even, carrying cleanly through the room. Before this briefing proceeds, the record must reflect that the department's draft language omitted key findings related to pending misconduct review. The room lit up again with questions, louder now, more relentless, but no one could outrun that sentence. It landed with institutional weight. This was no longer only about one officer acting on bias in public. It was about what the department had planned to hide, what Vanessa had come to verify, and how the attempt to push her aside had exposed the very thing the briefing was supposed to control. Mercer looked at the podium, then at the cameras, then back at Vanessa, and for the first time all morning, he did not try to take the floor from her. He simply nodded once, because there are moments when power stops pretending. And in that moment, with Ryan stripped of immediate authority, the press conference collapsing into accountability, and Vanessa Brooks standing unshaken at the center of it all, the karma was no longer coming. It had already arrived. No one interrupted her after that. It was a subtle change, but it was the clearest one in the room. The same reporters who had once watched Vanessa Brooks with suspicion now watched her with attention. The same staffers who had looked past her when she entered now looked down, avoiding her gaze as if shame itself had become visible under fluorescent light. At the front of the media room, the podium still stood beneath the city seal, but it no longer felt like a place of command. It felt like evidence. Chief Harold Mercer remained beside it with the expression of a man who understood that every sentence spoken next would live far beyond the walls of City Hall. Officer Ryan Cole had already been pulled back from the center of the room, his badge surrendered, his authority reduced to silence in front of cameras that had captured every step of his mistake. Daniel Reeves stood off to the side, shoulders tense, saying nothing, learning in real time the price of following certainty without asking who it served. Vanessa walked forward then, not quickly, not triumphantly, just with the calm, measured pace of someone who had no need to rush because truth did not need help catching up anymore. She reached the podium and placed her folder on its surface with quiet care. The microphones picked up the soft sound of leather meeting wood, and somehow even that seemed to echo. Reporters lifted their pens again. Camera lights held steady. Somewhere in the back, a producer whispered that every local affiliate was still carrying the live feed. Vanessa opened the folder and removed the top document, but she did not read from it immediately. Instead, she looked out at the room, at the uniforms, the cameras, the city employees, the people who had come expecting a performance and found themselves inside a reckoning. Before any prepared statement is made, she said, the public record deserves accuracy. Her voice was even, controlled, and unshaken, the kind of voice that carried more force because it did not chase volume. This department was scheduled today to address pending misconduct findings involving omissions in reporting, failures in supervisory review, and procedural inconsistencies tied to citizen complaints. My office was present to verify that the department's public remarks reflected those findings honestly. A fresh wave of silence moved through the room, heavier than the questions had been. This was not rumor anymore, not outrage, not accusation built on emotion. It was process, documentation, the language of accountability, spoken plainly enough that no one could pretend not to understand it. Vanessa lowered her eyes to the page in front of her for just a second, then looked up again. Instead, before this briefing began, I was publicly detained after identifying myself through the proper channel. She did not add anger to the sentence. She did not need to. The room supplied the rest. Nina Ellis was no longer writing fast. She was writing carefully now, because this had become the kind of moment every reporter knows must be quoted exactly. Chief Mercer looked down at the floor, then back at the cameras, then finally at Vanessa. Whatever instinct he once had to take back control had burned away. He gave a small nod, not of comfort, not of alliance, but of surrender to the obvious. Vanessa continued. What happened here this morning matters for two reasons. First, because no public institution should respond to oversight with humiliation. Second, because when that response happens in full view, it reveals something deeper than one bad decision. It reveals what people believe they can do when they think no one important is watching. That landed harder than any shouted condemnation could have. A few of the reporters lowered their pens for a moment just to look at her. One of the city staffers near the side wall covered his mouth with his hand. Daniel Reeves closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, as though trying to steady himself inside a truth he could not escape. Vanessa rested one hand lightly on the folder. But someone is always watching, she said. The public is watching. The record is watching. And sometimes the truth arrives before the statement does. No one moved. The microphones hummed softly. Outside the tall windows lining the hallway beyond the room, the late morning sun had shifted just enough to send a thin band of light across the floor, cutting through the sterile, white glare overhead. It touched the edge of the podium, the corner of Vanessa's folder, and the silver seal on the page in front of her. It was a small thing, almost nothing, but in that room it felt like punctuation. Nina Ellis lifted her head and asked the final question of the morning, the one everyone else had been circling without saying aloud. Ms. Brooks, after everything that happened, here today, what comes next? Vanessa looked at her, then let her gaze travel once across the room, over the podium, over Chief Mercer, over the officers, over the people who had seen her treated like an interruption before discovering she was the one sent to protect the truth. When she answered, her voice was calm enough to sound almost gentle. What comes next, she said, is what should have come first. A full record, honest review, and consequences that do not disappear once the cameras are gone. Then she closed the folder. Not sharply, not for effect, just firmly enough to let the sound settle. And in the stillness that followed, everyone in that room understood the real lesson of the morning. Power had entered believing it could shape the narrative. Truth had entered carrying only a folder and a name. In the end, only one of them had to raise its voice. Because the problem was never who stood at the podium. The problem was who believed they could decide who belonged there. And that day, under the bright lights of a room built for control, the law did not look like a badge or a title or a rehearsed statement. It looked like a black woman who stood her ground, told the truth, and let the system expose itself.